decided impulsively, you know what this actually really needs? Slides. So I ruined my whole day trying to make that happen, and there will definitely be typos in this, and my little brother is right in the back to shout them out as they appear. That is what siblings are for. And so again, last minute presentation. And we'll see if it works. There's definitely going to be at least one moment where I pause and you see like a lot of like confused clicking for a minute. And so just be ready for that. But so as it says here, some people, there's really fundamentally two paths into motorcycling. You either love working on things and incidentally you get to ride, or you start riding and eventually the bike makes a weird noise. And then a wrench has to be turned. I am definitely in that second category. I didn't start off with any mechanical experience before I had to have it. This is the kind of stuff that's like more in my like comfort zone. And you know, that's something that's easy for me to tell a story about. When I heard the theme was garage, I was a little worried. I was like, oh no, that's the hardest part of all of this. I would much rather be doing that. That makes more sense to me. But when you do things like that and you send an XT flying away into the stratosphere, you do eventually have to turn wrenches. And amazingly, that bike isn't even the one that we really had to up our game for. So my Versys 300, I've put somewhere over 35,000 miles on it. I unplug the odometer all the time, so I don't really know what the mileage is anymore, but somewhere in that vicinity. And I always knew this day would probably come when it made a noise that it wasn't supposed to. This was that day. I heard something rattling in the top end of the engine, and at first I tried to convince myself that I was kind of hallucinating this out of anxiety, and then it got louder and I could feel it through the handlebars, and I was like, this is turning into a real situation. And so I did the very sophisticated mechanical work I can do. Turned up the volume on my Senna, and what do you know? The noise went away. That's the end of my story. Thank you so much. I wish. So there are some reasons that I was maybe not surprised to have this happen. When this started, I actually thought, it's like, no, this has been coming. I deserve this. In fact, it's amazing I've made it this far. And so some of the sins against the Versys that may have gotten us into this situation include submarine activities. Picture taking moments before disaster. That was the biggest water crossing I'd ever attempted. Thankfully, there were plenty of witnesses for the moment when I went fully into the water. And the bike became a submarine vehicle briefly. It was not good at it. It took two of us to get it out of there. And it took all of us to pour the water out of it. You can see water spouting out of the exhaust there. And I had never met any of these people before in my life, by the way. So this was a real bonding experience for the group. And for a second I thought I might have actually, somehow gotten out of this without any consequences. Nope. Oh. Yes, gasp of horror. So we got the bike running on the shore, and for a second I thought we were good, and then someone said, oh no. And I was like, what's oh no? It's running, that's good, right? And he points to the sight glass, and I see this, the forbidden chocolate milk. So I got the trailer ride of shame home that day. 5 oil changes later, several oil filters, and a lot of crying on my part. That had been resolved. But you always kind of wonder, once you've had creek water through your entire engine, if that's going to come back to haunt you later. And that is unfortunately not even the only sin. So the other thing I've done to this poor little bike is try and keep up with properly sized motorcycles. And I have sent my 300 chasing down the highway after much larger machines for days at a time. So one of these numbers, little different than the others. This bike was really ideally made for Thailand, which has slightly different riding conditions and highways that guilty BMW rider trying to hide over there. It's not his fault that I choose to do these things, though. He was going at his pace, and I could have just rolled off a little bit and not held my bike at 10,000 RPM for 6 hours repeatedly. I mean, it's a little sport bike motor. It loves it, right? Right? And that brings me to the final sin that really nearly did me in, which was Did not check the oil. What? Yes, groan of horror from the audience. What is missing from this picture? Sure enough. And I somehow got away with this before the engine seized, and was able to refill it. I see someone taking a picture. This is my moment of shame. Don't take a picture of this. And so, all these things combined, when I heard something rattling in the top end of my motor, it's like, it's all coming home now. It's time to reckon with the consequences of my actions. And so what followed was a lot of, diagnostic work and research. Here I am outside of Comet Bike Night with the Technical Advisory Council of other riders, all weighing in and giving me various ideas on what the problem might be and what to do. One friend of mine, he had 2 words of advice: sell it. And then I actually started the bike and he heard it rattling around. He's like, sell it to someone who lives out of state so that this doesn't come back later. And so that was the situation I was up against, and what I put together with the help of other people is that the rattling noise I was hearing was likely the cam chain that moderates the timing of the entire engine, and it was likely worn out and now stretched beyond spec, and the tensioner could no longer keep it in tension. The one thing I understood about cam chains even at that time is that you really, really, really don't want them to fail. It's a part that can go from costing you $50 to get a new one to costing you $1,200 for a new engine in a matter of seconds. So, unfortunately, there wasn't too much I could do because I started calling around to see if a professional could rescue me from my wrongdoings. And I was handed a number in return after weeks of back and forth phone calls. A number that brought tears to my eyes. A person with a 3-digit checking account was given a 4-digit estimate. And so all I could do was just, thank you for your time. Couldn't even afford the stock image. And so this was a bit of a crushing moment for me. I was at a point where I felt like I am powerless to solve this problem that I have created. What am I going to do? And it really wasn't in my nature to give up, because I came from a family where the only way cars left our possession was for an NPR tax write-off at the end of all possible serviceable life, usually with over 300,000 miles. So the idea of just scrapping this or giving up on it kind of sat wrong with me, especially because the bike had 300 miles on it when I bought it. Whatever was wrong with it was my fault. I very much wanted a chance to at least try and make up for whatever I had done. And that brings us to the plan. So I had been talking to a bunch of people, trying to kind of troubleshoot my way through this, or even just, cry for a little bit online. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was in this room, and I think I should point him out so everyone can stare really awkwardly at him and make him turn red. This is Nate. We were talking one day, and he had the brilliant idea, and he just said, well, why don't we just do it ourselves? Why don't we just put a new cam chain in? And I kind of looked at that for a second, and my first response was, who is this we you are talking about? I can kind of do a carburetor. I can maybe take wheels on and off. I cannot get into the top end of this engine and do anything helpful for the situation. Let alone, we wouldn't have to split the cases to do a job like this, but God forbid we did, I wouldn't be able to do anything to help. But, what if we did, though? And so what followed was, and by the way, this is how me and Nate met. This was the first time we really got to know each other. We've been riding in Louisville, and then we kind of had the initiation by fire on the KAT. And, a lifelong bond is formed after you both take a line that bad through the same mud hole. Equal levels of enthusiasm there, equally incorrect decisions being made in those moments. And I was like, if we can get through that, maybe somehow this will also work. And it's not like I have any other options available, so let's send it. So what followed was some preparation work. Oh, by the way, this is also, I included for Nate. Now, I bet you didn't know that I had help from a famous YouTuber. That's right, pretty darn cool. So I knew that Nate, while I was like crying over my little cam chain problem, had been like quietly rebuilding an entire CB400F casually on the weekends. And so I was like, all right, this is a person who actually has the skills to maybe be good on his word here. And so what followed then was trying to figure out how this actually worked. I actually had to use my degree for the first time since I graduated, going through this and tabbing everything we would need, and then finding all the part numbers I would need and going online to cross-reference those with diagrams and make a list of what you needed to buy. There was no like list or there was no kit you could buy to do what we were gonna do. I had to like piece it together, and the problem is that Nate lives 100 miles away from me. So once this got started, if I didn't have one of these special order O-rings, I was just gonna be stuck 100 miles from my job in someone else's garage, I guess paying for pizza and beer until I could find a way out of there. So the planning really had to be perfect here. And I'm a person who's been described as not detail-oriented and sometimes forgetful. So I was a little worried that I had been trusted with this level of intensity. And the consequences if I failed would be pretty bad. It would involve a lot of embarrassing phone calls to my job 100 miles away, explaining why I wasn't there. And so we get into it. And things went fantastically right from the beginning, as you can see. That is the bucket the coolant was meant to go into. That is where the coolant decided to go. And not pictured was my service manual sitting within the flood zone, which I had to do a sliding dive to save. I was like, if the sacred text turns into a book full of green pulp, we're so sunk right now. And so Sunday night I got there after work, and we immediately got into it, and by the end of the night, we had this. We managed to wrestle the motor out, just the two of us, and without a lift or a stand or anything. And what we mostly did, it could have been like a rodeo event. It involved a lot of like struggling on the other side of the bike and a bit like wrestling an alligator. And we managed to really test the tensile strength of the one poor sensor that we left plugged in. So the last second I had to like reach under and around, like trying to free this thing before something expensive breaks. That was when the first busted knuckles of the weekend occurred. And now we are on a ticking clock because I have to be back at work. I've taken off Monday and Tuesday. This is Sunday night. If this is not a running motor, this sad little skeleton here is not a running motorcycle again, I'm gonna have to make some phone calls. There is not a backup plan here. This has to work, or well, it has to work. And so Sunday, motor on table. I couldn't believe it. I was surprised this had worked thus far, and I was a little, horrified to see outside of my bike the engine. I felt like we should have like, surgical shrouds up or something. I felt like we should have like scrubbed in. I was like, can we be touching all this stuff? All these like little machined surfaces. I'm like, I feel like I'm not supposed to see this or breathe on it. And then we came to our first difficulty. So I made a few incorrect assumptions about this at the outset. I had really delusionally convinced myself we definitely would not have to split the crankcases of this motor. Convinced myself of that because I think that I would have had a nervous breakdown if I'd actually let that be a real possibility in my mind. And then we did. And we did not have the special tools required to remove what we needed to remove to actually split the cases. And what followed was a lot of posting around on Facebook seeing if anyone had this magneto puller in this one size. No one did. And I'm like, well, that's $60 and a week of shipping. I need to be gone like by the end of tomorrow, so what are we gonna do here? And this is when the wizardry occurred. And this is why I did not dare attempt this on my own, because this would have been where I was completely sunk, right? If I had somehow made it this far on my own, I would have just had a disassembled motorcycle in my garage indefinitely after. Because there was one tiny bolt back here that had to come out. And I still don't know how he managed to, instead of pulling the entire assembly like we were supposed to, get behind it with a tiny wrench and coax out the one tiny bolt we actually needed to get out to pull the cases apart. And yeah, this is the other side where it actually was. So it was right back there, about to ruin months of planning and my only chance of getting this done, one single bolt. And he got it out. And even as I was watching, I was like, I don't know how that's physically possible. And yep, that's where we were left after that. This is someone thinking about their life choices. What got me to this moment? And how can I make sure it never happens again? And so I never thought I would see this deep into my motorcycle. And I was a little horrified and a little impressed that this was happening and that nothing had exploded yet. But we hadn't really gotten to the explosion possible part yet. So then we had to get this all back together. We worked all day Monday from when we got up till the evening, and what that left us with was a motor back in the bike and a woman who does not know how she's getting home tomorrow. This is the face of someone who does not know what's going to happen when the button is pushed. I was terrified. I was like, this is it. This is where like the motor seizes and I have a new worse problem. If anything horrible is going to happen, it's going to happen right now. And it didn't. We had somehow gotten this entire motor apart, replaced the cam chain, replaced the sliders, even put a new piston and new cylinders and piston in, and gotten it back together into a running bike. From Sunday afternoon to Monday night, the work was done, and now it was just some assembly required to get back home. Now, this is when Nate had to go back to having a real job and just was like, put this back together, we did the hard part, good luck, see ya, and went back in to go to his job. And this was where my overthinking ways took over, because when we took this apart, I had, started leafing through my manual to find like the very first step to unplug plug A from socket B and work through it like that and take probably a solid 72 hours. Nate would just make 2 circles around the bike, unplugging and disconnecting everything that needed to be disconnected, and then we were ready for the next step. So without that kind of instinct around, it took me a little while to get the bike back together, going back to the manual and overthinking every tiny step of what had to happen. Finally, I got it done, and was back in one piece Tuesday night, having taken the motor out of this bike Sunday afternoon. And I had work Wednesday morning, and as long as the 100 miles between Louisville and Cincinnati were uneventful, I would be back at work on time. So here again we are on Monday, and this is Tuesday night outside of Comet, where I'd come to meet my friends after doing a 48-hour engine rebuild. I couldn't even believe it when I pulled up. It was like the first time I rode a bike. I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe nothing is exploding. I can't believe this is somehow allowed. That's how I felt rolling back up to Comet. And it was raining and quiet. Most people had already cleared out for the night. And I really sensed in that moment how much is possible if you can just get the pieces together and find the right people to help you close that last gap. My main contributions to this were just getting the parts, doing the prep work, and helping wrestle the engine in and out of the case. I really think that without Nate's experience, I wouldn't have been able to set the timing correctly, set the torque correctly, get those fiddly little piston rings in place. I did one and it took too long. If you just have the faith to get yourself to that point, though, where someone can help you, it is insane what is possible. Again, part of my motorcycle I never expected to see and never hoped to see. And hopefully we'll not see again for at least a few years, please God. In conclusion, I will never do that again. That pushed it too close. But it is amazing with a little audacity and the right friends, you can push it too close and not have a trailer and somehow wind up with a working bike again. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Kaitlin. I think a few of us have had a few experiences in the garages where like, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to get this one done. Thank you so much for being here. Can we get another round of applause for all of our storytellers? Can we please give one more round of applause to Les and Olga for opening up their stories to us? They're amazing. You all are amazing. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for riding through the rain. Thank you for staying till it's dark. And please be safe getting home, and here's looking forward to the next event.